Let's stay on this story and bring in Joe Moreno. He is a former U.S. federal prosecutor, giving his insight into this morning. So nice to see you today.
Good morning, Marianne. How are you?
Well, as we heard Steve Futterman just mention there, this investigation, of course, still in the early stages. But based on what we know so far and the evidence that police have revealed that they have collected so far, how strong of a case is this looking, in your opinion?
Marianne, I think to your point, we have to caveat everything by saying we don't know everything, right? It's still very early. But from what we know, it doesn't seem like a terribly complicated case. There was a single shooter, there was a single weapon. It sounds like Mr. Robinson made incriminating statements to family members and friends. It sounds like there were indicators on social media. So I don't think there's a lot of question about how the government would set up the prosecution here. It doesn't need a lot of witnesses. There's not a lot of physical evidence. And so while, of course, Mr. Robinson has to be given the presumption of innocence, if in fact this case is as it appears right now, it doesn't seem like a very difficult one for the prosecution to bring.
Since we're talking about evidence, I do want to ask you about the engravings on some of the shell casings investigators say they found there at the scene. What does that tell you about how that could be used potentially in what will be the future trial?
Not so much. It's not so much important as to the guilt of Mr. Robinson as perhaps it is to his motivation. If in fact he was politically motivated against Charlie Kirk, as it seems he was based on those shell casing engravements, as well as perhaps statements he's made, were there others involved that encouraged him? Was he mentally ill, which is a possibility? So I think that, again, it's not so much whether he did this, it's why he did this.
We know this case, of course, has a lot of attention, not only within the United States, but internationally as well. It is currently under the jurisdiction of Utah prosecutors, but as we saw, of course, heavy involvement from the FBI. What does that tell us about whether this could be tried federally?
Unlikely. So I know that many people think that bringing something federally is more powerful. Perhaps it can lead to more severe punishments. But the fact is, most simple murders occur at the state level, and that's probably the best thing because state prosecutors just have more experience in bringing cases like this. Murders at a federal level are typically very specialized, like in the case of trying to assassinate a president or killing a federal agent or in terrorism cases. So it's very unlikely that you'll see this in federal court. It's common for federal resources like the FBI to cooperate, and it sounds like they did a really nice job working with Utah state and local authorities. But I think it's very likely we're going to see this in a Utah courtroom in the next coming months.
We know the suspect in this case makes his first court appearance on Tuesday, also standing by to find out what this means when it comes to potentially more charges there. But when it comes to the penalty, jumping ahead there, we know that Utah's Attorney General said everything's on the table, including the death penalty. President Donald Trump also said he hopes the shooter gets the death penalty. In your opinion, how likely is that to happen?
Well, it's up to the prosecutor. So it's completely the prosecutor's decision whether or not to enhance the prosecution to aggravated murder, which could lead to capital punishment. And the prosecutor has 60 days to do that. So we may or may not know on Tuesday whether the case is going in that direction. That's a very controversial thing here in America. Some states do it, many do not. It adds a whole level of complexity to the trial because basically if the prosecution goes this way and gets a guilty verdict, then there's basically almost a second trial where mitigating evidence is presented, aggravating evidence is presented, and then you need a unanimous jury to find beyond a reasonable doubt again that the aggravating evidence outweighs the mitigating evidence. So now you're talking about adding months and months to what's already going to be a long trial because of the attention this is getting. It also adds years of appeals that are highly likely. So it could be the big difference between something that's done relatively quickly versus something that takes years.
But again, bringing us back to the fact that this is still in its early stages. Again, the suspect has not even made his first official court appearance yet. That's expected to happen in the coming days. What are you watching for in the coming days?
Marianne, typically I'd say it's what are the charges and what is the plea. Most likely, though, it's going to be pretty simple. It'll be a simple murder charge, and it'll probably be a not guilty plea because that's just what defendants typically do. You can always change it later. Then we'll see from the prosecution if within 60 days they decide to elect for a capital murder charges like we just talked about. And of course, if the defendant changes his plea to not guilty. There's also, of course, always the possibility the defendant pleads not guilty by reason of mental defect, or basically insanity. So that's also a possibility here. So we might not get a lot of answers on Tuesday. It'll be sort of one small step in this process. It might take weeks and months to really kind of see how this trial is going to unfold.
All right. Former U.S. Federal Prosecutor Joe Moreno, thank you so much for your time and for your insight this morning.
Thanks, Marianne.